everybody. Welcome to the Hallmark Keys podcast. And today we have another episode of our romantic reading wrap up. And we are talking about Jane Austen, the queen of the romance novel. We're talking about her book, Persuasion, in honor of the the Netflix original movie that came out this month. And we'll have thoughts about that and about Jane Austen. So it's going to be fun. I'm film critic Rachel Wagner. Bree's here.
Hello, everyone.
And Bree, we have a very exciting guest with us today.
We do.
Yes, your co-host on the Categorically Romance podcast. We have Aaron Taylor here. Aaron, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So this is your first time on our show. So why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about tell us a little bit about yourself and also how you started podcasting with Bree.
So I started a booktube channel probably about 6-7 years ago. I read mostly sci-fi at the time. Made a switch to romance. It wasn't on purpose, it was kind of on accident, but happy accident. Haven't stopped since, and have just turned my YouTube channel into just total romance all the time. And so I mostly do vlog entries, vlogs of read-throughs of books. A lot of Harlequins, but there are some single titles that I do too. So I read a chapter, I try and make a clever tweet, and then I record a vlog entry every chapter. So it's kind of a whole process. It's fun to do, but it does kind of suck some of the enjoyment out of reading out of it. But I enjoy it, and other people seem to enjoy it.
I love your clever tweets.
Thank you. And that got Bree's attention, and she invited me on to guest a few times on the Categorically Romance podcast. And if anyone's aware, the other co-host Sarah has spent some time in the hospital, and so I filled in during that gap, but they asked me to stay on afterwards. Yeah. So here I am.
It's been a match made in heaven.
Yeah, so that's where you met each other, was on Twitter then. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Though we had, I guess, our booktube social circles kind of crossed over a little bit, but we didn't connect until actually on Twitter.
So how did you get started reading romance?
Oh, so I was on a mission to read this list of the 100 best sci-fi books before the year 2000. When I finished that, it was mostly white men that were dead too that wrote those books. So I decided it was time to read a little more diversely. And in that diversity reading, I read The Wedding Date by Jasmine Gilroy, and that was the nail in the coffin for me. I haven't looked back since.
I haven't even heard this story. I love that so much, Aaron.
I'll have to read that. I haven't read that. What's it called again?
The Wedding Date.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, it's great. It's like trapped in an elevator in the beginning, strangers, but guy needs a wedding date, and they had a good time being trapped in the elevator together. Nothing steamy happened, but he asked her to go to the wedding with him, and it's just so cute all the way through.
Tons of food references.
Oh yeah.
Do you get flack from some people, being a guy in the romance reading world?
Being a white male, no, because no one's going to say anything to me, unfortunately. Unfortunately, they'll say things to anyone else reading a romance. And I say to them, well, have you tried reading one? And their answer is always no.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, very cool. Well, let's dive into Persuasion, talk about Jane Austen. Now, Bree, you had read Pride and Prejudice, right? Or one of them before?
Yes.
Okay.
I had only read Pride and Prejudice up to this point. And it's been some years, y'all.
And you only read it the one time?
I only read it the one time.
Sorry.
I am not a classics person. Maybe modern classics, but like Jane Austen and all of that. I'm like, I love hearing people talk about it, but it's not for me.
What's your biggest barrier in enjoying Austen? Is it just the language or the pacing, or what's a challenge for you?
I don't know. I remember reading Pride and Prejudice, and it was one of the first audiobooks that I remember listening to. And I think having it on audio definitely helped. I don't know. Oh, I love seeing friends that love classics and like read them all the time. And I'm just like, oh, I have no interest in reading these books. I'm such a contemporary reader. I think that's it. I think I'm such a contemporary reader.
Yeah. What about you, Aaron? What's your sort of history with Jane Austen?
So in the beginnings of my romance journey, while I was, looking for new things to read, I remembered, I loved the 1995 Pride and Prejudice adaptation. And my parents actually had the whole thing on VHS tape. So I wore those tapes out. So
Yeah.
I had never read the book. So I was like, oh, well, perfect opportunity. I'm going to read Pride and Prejudice. And then, a couple weeks later, I had read most of Jane's works, and, it was great. And I go back for a reread quite often on several of them. So Emma, Persuasion, and Pride and Prejudice definitely most often.
Yeah. So when I was in high school, my senior year of high school, I actually did community college instead of high school. And we got like 2 months off for winter break. Like it was a long time, a month and a half, something like that. And so I was my parents had moved. That's the reason why I started college early. My parents had moved across the country, so I didn't really have any friends. So my mom's a big reader. She's always loved the classics. And so I decided to read Sensibility. That was the first one that I ever read. And it wasn't that far off of, the movie came out in 1995, which I loved, of course. And this would have been 97. So it would have been fairly close. So I'm not sure if that's why I picked that one first or what was the reason, but anyway, I read that and I just loved it and devoured it. And I think maybe that was a good one for me to start on, because I have a sister that I was very close to, 2 years younger. And then I have a sister that's 10 years younger. And then my mom actually was during that time, my mom had another little girl. So I had another brand new sister. So Sensibility, is kind of all about sisters. So maybe that was part of it as well, but I just loved it. And so then I read Pride and Prejudice and Emma during that break. I just devoured them. And then I kind of made it a thing for a long time that I would read her 6 main novels every year. And particularly 5. Sometimes I wouldn't read Mansfield Park. I will talk about that later.
I get it. I understand.
I've grown to appreciate it over the years, but it's my least favorite of her novels. But I just love her characters. I love the banter. I love the stories, and it just really kind of got me interested in reading the classics. It's interesting because I'm a pretty big reader in my adult life, but as a kid, I actually wasn't that much of a reader.
Yeah.
I was kind of slow to read. I didn't start until about 2nd grade. That I was like, and then the very first like big book that I ever remembered reading was I read Little Women when this was like 4th or 4th grade. And I was very, very proud of the fact that I had read this big book, it was, I've always loved that story and my whole life. But I don't know, I just wasn't that big of a reader. And I remember in high school, I got on a John Grisham kick. That was my YA novels, were reading The Client and The Pelican Brief and stuff like that. But anyway, it wasn't until I was an adult that I really started like reading with some intensity, I guess. And read Dickens, read Austen, read Elizabeth Gaskell, some of my favorites. And it's interesting you say, Bree, because I find it harder to find contemporary reads that I like. So often it seems like they lean into like, I don't have a problem with there being sensuality and steam in books or language, But I do have a problem when I feel like they're kind of leaning onto those
Yeah.
things in a kind of a lazy way, where I feel like sometimes the classics, they had to sort of try harder with the characters in the story because they didn't have a lot of those things to kind of lean on to entice and
Right.
titillate the reader.
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know. So anyway, that's kind of my history with Austen. And I for the most part have enjoyed the various adaptations of Austen's work. I get annoyed with Hallmark because they put Austen's names on things, but then they're not actually versions of the book at all, like Pride, Prejudice, and Mistletoe, which
Yeah.
was not Pride and Prejudice at all. They have Lacey Chabert playing a Darcy character, and it's just basically a party planning movie. And then Sensibility and Snowman was not it at all. So that annoys
It's a
me.
marketing thing, Rachel.
Yeah.
It's annoying. I don't like it. Just because I would love for them to really do one, to do like
Yeah.
a real, that would be so fun, but they don't.
Yeah.
So I don't like that. But aside from that, usually I'm pretty easygoing. I was telling Aaron off air that I even like the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which nobody hardly likes. I enjoyed it. I thought it was fun to have our sort of characters kicking butt and killing zombies and stuff.
Yeah.
To me, that was enjoyable. We'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast.
Escape to the Florida Emerald Coast this summer in The Beach Escape by Rachel Mcgee from Hallmark Publishing.
After a monumental heartbreak, Molly Lawrence is trying to start over as a traveling vet.
But Grant Torres, his charming dimples, and one stubborn loggerhead turtle named Chompers challenge the future Molly's imagined for herself.
The perfect beach read for your summer book list, The Beach Escape is a friends to lovers romance full of snorkeling, sailing, and of course, turtles.
The Beach Escape is available August 9th from Hallmark Publishing on Amazon and in stores at selected bookstores.
For more information about The Beach Escape and other titles by Rachel Mcgee, visit www.rachelmcgeebooks.com.
That's rachelmcgeebooks.com.
What do you think about, I mean, I know that Persuasion has a few adaptations. I know Pride and Prejudice has a bunch of adaptations. Like,
Yeah.
what do you think as both a reader and with you being a film critic as well, like the constant updating of the adaptations? Like, I still haven't watched the adaptation that came out, was it last year or 2 years ago, of Rebecca? Because I'm like, Alfred Hitchcock's, I feel like, was the only one that we needed. Like, why did we need a new one? But it does, I think, bring some brief attention to the book for people that may not have read it. But it's like, at this point, if you haven't heard of Jane Austen, I don't know. So like, what are y'all's thoughts of like the constant, because like the diehard fans are like, we didn't need another adaptation. You know, everybody has their favorites, but like, what do you think?
What's the interesting thing about Persuasion in particular is that we haven't ever really gotten a great version of Persuasion. We've had a couple serviceable, decent versions, but we haven't gotten like that definitive version like we have with the Colin Firth Pride and Prejudice, which is like practically perfect as far as translating the book over to a movie or series. We've never gotten that with Persuasion. I think what's harder with Persuasion is that you have a somewhat kind of timid and introverted heroine, which is harder to translate to the screen. And especially modern audiences want bold and, you know, tough and, you know, kind of thing. And just so to try to kind of capture that, it's harder, which I think is a shame because everybody deserves to have their characters that they can relate to on screen. Like all female characters shouldn't be like bold and and snarky. Like we should have some sweet, kind, introverted characters on the screen. But I think that is the challenge. That's the difficulty with Persuasion. But yeah, I think just like anything, Hollywood is just desperate for IPs, intellectual properties, and something that people will say, "Ooh, I know that. I know that. I'm interested in that." And so that's why they look to Jane Austen just like they look to Batman. You know, it's something people know, some people recognize. And it's just easier to sell than some random Regency novelist, or whatever
Yeah.
that doesn't have that IP recognition. I know. What do you think, Aaron, about that?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a trend in cinema for a while that, the producers are going for name recognition on anything. So we've got all of these big franchises and everything. And it, it all comes down to no one's going to lay down money on something that's not going to return it. Right. So that's why we don't really have original films hitting the theaters anymore. We've got, a new Dune movie, which I loved. I thought it was great, but still it's like, we could do something new. But yeah, it's I feel like they tried to modernize a little too much. And like you said, it's people aren't cookie cutter shapes. Like I remember in like the 80s and 90s, the action movies, the hero had to be the Arnold Schwarzenegger type, So it's almost like a version of that where the heroines have to be snarky and quick-witted and everything. But yeah, it's not everyone's like that, and we should be able to see the timid introverted person falling in love, like, and finding love. That's something that they deserve.
There's room at the table for everybody.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah, and that's the problem with this new version of Persuasion, is that it's barely Persuasion at all. It's a second chance romance, but it's that's about it, really. I mean, they meet up again, but they completely change Anne's character. She's snarky. She's drunk most of the movie, which is weird.
Yeah.
She's breaking the fourth wall, talking to the camera.
I actually enjoyed that part of it.
Oh, you did?
Yeah, because I thought it inserted the Austen wit that you don't, the narration you get in the book that you don't get in the movies. That's usually the thing that has you laughing the most in the books is just the narration and commentary. So, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. I maybe could have enjoyed that more if they had actually stuck to Austen's prose. Instead, they're having her say things like what do they say? A 5 in London is a 10 in Bath.
Oh, yeah.
Like, no.
Yeah, that was weird.
And she's all talking about her exes, and it was not good. I'm like, you have some of the most beautiful language ever. I mean, some of the most beautiful prose ever written in the English language, and you're going with a 5 in London is a 10 in Bath. It's that. And like, there's a point where she literally spills an entire bottle of wine on her head. I mean, it's just like, this is not this character at all.
Well, now that I think about it, so if it's a viewer that's never actually read the novel and they watch this movie and they fall in love with the movie, they're going to be potentially disappointed when they go read the book because it's not the same.
Yeah. And I mean, and just from a movie making standpoint, it wasn't very strong. The costumes are all over the place. They make no sense. The hair doesn't make any sense for the time period. Like, it would have been better if they had just had it be a modern movie, because if you want her hair to be down the whole time, to just things like that. And then they totally changed Mr. Elliot's character. He's such he's such a villain, in this. And then in the end, they actually want to make it seem like his wedding at the end of the movie is some kind of triumph for love. And like, don't let anybody tell you can't love who you want to love. What? Not this character at all. His great love match is supposedly Mrs. Clay in the movie. And like, what? Also, they have this weird conversation in the movie where they agree that we'll just be friends. We're going to be friends. And I thought that was a mistake, because this is not a story that has huge stakes. Like, they're pretty, it's just not a ton. And so establishing that they actually kind of like each other and that they're friends early on kind of takes whatever tension, romantic tension was there, because
Mhm.
it takes it away. So I thought that was a big mistake as well. It just was bad. It was bad. Like when I first watched it, I was kind of like, and then like I kept thinking about it. I'm like, ooh, I don't like that at all. I don't like that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to give it a chance in the beginning.
Yeah.
I found some things that I liked about it, but then it just kept going.
Yeah. I mean, I think the
Yeah.
best part is probably her sister Mary in any version of
Yes.
Persuasion,
Yeah.
and including this one. She's very funny. So that works. But
Mhm.
let's dive in a little bit and talk a little bit more about the book. So the summary is Anne Elliot, a young English woman of 27 years whose family moves to lower their expenses and reduce their debt by renting their home to an admiral and his wife. The wife's brother, Captain Frederick Wentworth, was engaged to Anne in 1806, but the engagement was broken when Anne was persuaded by her friends and family to end their relationship. Anne and Captain Wentworth, both still single and unattached, meet again after a 7-year separation, setting the scene for many humorous encounters as well as a second well-considered chance at love and marriage for Anne in her second bloom. So I always kind of love that she's in her second bloom.
27.
Oh,
I'm
spinster.
like still waiting for my second bloom, I think. I don't even know if I had a first bloom, but but really, I mean, at 27, Anne would have been considered basically unmarriageable
Yeah.
at that point
Mhm.
in this time. So the fact that Wentworth still holds a candle for her all these years is very, very romantic. And he starts out just so angry and annoyed with her, what she did. And I think that just makes him a very swoon-worthy character. And I think he's probably the most fleshed out, with maybe Mr. Knightley and Emma, maybe it would be a contender,
Mhm.
but either one of them are probably the most fleshed out of any of the male leads of Austen book. You agree, Aaron?
Yeah. Yeah. I was trying to think. I was thinking like maybe Mansfield Park, but that was more just length than anything. Like he was,
Mm-hmm.
he just spent the whole book, chasing someone else, and then
Yeah.
went to Fanny in the end. It's like, what do you say, Fanny? Yeah.
So I read that this was her final completed novel, and it came out after she died, which is kind of creepy and sad. But people call it her most mature novel. So
Yeah.
I mean, I've only read 2 at this point, but do y'all agree with that or what?
I think so. And it does
Yeah.
feel like a tiny bit autobiographical, a little bit, and just in the sense, obviously didn't have this romance, but just in the sense that she never married, and that Anne kind of feels maybe something like what I would imagine maybe her personality is like, or at least her life situation is somewhat similar.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. From what I've read, Austen didn't bask in the fame that much. She really didn't, want to take the spotlight or anything like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, and Anne is also a more mature character in the sense of she's less flawed than certainly Emma, for sure. Emma is
yeah.
way more young and flawed. And then Lizzie is definitely more high spirited. And you've got the Dashwood sisters in Sensibility. At least Marianne is more of the high spirited kind of thing. And so in that sense, she's definitely a more mature character. I mean, she's just older. And that is also kind of annoying when I was talking to a friend of mine, and she said that people are always trying to make all of Austen's heroines Lizzie Bennet. And I think that there is some truth to that, and especially in this new Persuasion, that they all want to be sort of the strong-willed, independent character that Lizzie Bennet is. But this is a similar thing you see in a lot of versions of Little Women, where every character is like Jo. And I'm like, if every character is like Jo, then Jo's not special.
Yeah.
I really liked when they talk about Wentworth at the end. And you get this is what I'm saying, some of the introspection and you really get to know him in a way that you don't know some of the others. They say, it says, there may not have been one person more my enemy even than that lady, talking about Lady Russell. There may not have been one person more my enemy even than that lady, my own self. Tell me if when I returned to England in the year 18 and few thousand pounds and was posted into Laconia, if I had written to you, would you have answered my letter? Would you, in short, have renewed the engagement then? And she says, would I? Was all her answer. But the accent was decisive enough. Good God, he cried. You would. It is not that I did not think of it or desire it, as could alone crown all my other successes, but I was too proud to ask again. I did not understand you. I shut my eyes and would not understand you or do you justice. So I think it kind of getting into the male character in that kind of way is sort of unique about this story. Being self-aware.
Yeah. And just love how smitten he is with her.
Yeah. Especially again, if you know about that time period where she would have been considered unmarriageable. I mean, he's having the Musgraves be interested in him, and they were, way younger than Anne. I also love the fact that Anne isn't judgmental of those around her. She's not judgmental of Mary. She's not judgmental of the Musgroves. She has those opinions, and we hear them inside, but she just kind of usually keeps them to herself. And so I think it makes her a likable character. She's such a good listener, and she's not judgmental of those around her, despite being given ample reasons to be so.
Yeah, absolutely.
She felt very relatable.
Yeah.
Like, who hasn't been overlooked? Who hasn't disagreed with family decisions, or, looked back and had feelings about your own decisions that you've made in the past and stuff like that. I felt like she was super relatable. And
I'm glad you felt that.
Yeah.
What else did you think? I know the classics aren't your thing, but what else was your take sort of on reading Persuasion, Bree?
I think my only the thing that stuck out with me the most, which I kind of understand, I guess, why she did. I guess I would have liked to see more of Anne and Captain Wentworth on page together.
Yeah.
But sometimes those stories where they spend a lot of it away just end up working in the end. Like, it's just that much more satisfying, I guess. So I'm kind of torn on how I feel about it. Like, I would have liked to see it more, but at the same time, it's like, I get it.
What's an interesting thing about Austen is that despite her books being centered around marriage and the characters getting married, there's actually not very much romantic dialogue in her books, with the exception of Emma. Emma's really the only one where you get a lot of witty banter between the two leads, because they are they're not related, but they are both in-laws, in-lawed together.
Right.
So they spend a lot of time together. They bicker, they fight. Whereas the rest of her novels, they really don't spend that much time together. It's sort of an interesting thing. And it kind of drives me crazy when you get to these moments of of romantic dialogue. And a lot of times it says, Jane will say something like, he said what was appropriate for a man desperately in love. And I'm like,
yeah.
I wouldn't know what he said.
And she does that here too in Persuasion, but at least we get the iconic Wentworth Letter. And
yes.
This is and I was joking on Twitter the other day. I'm like, nobody writes a letter like a dude in a Jane Austen movie book.
Yeah.
There's just it's so swoon worthy to have these impassioned letters. And I love it. His is the best. It's so good. And he says, I can listen no longer in silence. I must speak to you by such means as are within my reach. You pierce my soul. I'm half agony, half hope. Tell me not that I'm too late, that such precious feelings are gone forever. I offer myself to you again with a heart even more your own than when you almost broke it 8.5 years ago. Dare not say that man forgets sooner than woman, that his love has an earlier death. I have loved none but you. Unjust I may have been, weak and resentful I have been, but never inconstant. You alone have brought me to Bath. For you alone I think and plan. Have you not seen this? Can you fail to have understood my wishes? I had not waited even these 10 days could I have read your feelings, as I think you must have penetrated mine. I can hardly write. I am every instant hearing something which overpowers me. You sink your voice, but I can distinguish the tones of that voice when they would be lost on others. Too good, too excellent a creature. You do us justice indeed. You do believe that there is true attachment and constancy among men. Believe it to be most fervent, most undeviating in me. So that is just great.
Right.
Can I
Tell me
ask
how
you what you thought of how the letter was presented in the latest movie?
Well, it's weird because the only one that actually of the versions that we've gotten, the only one that actually shows him writing the letter is the 1992 one, and it's such a good scene. It's a great scene. You see them talking, you see him, writing. And in this, and then in the 2007 one, it's kind of similar to this recent one with she just meets somebody. I was supposed to send you this letter. And I'm like, why would you do that when you have like the chance for this really dramatic scene of this letter writing? And then in this one, she gets the letter and then she goes and, finds him. And as she's searching for him, you get the letter read out. I didn't think that they had any chemistry in this recent one at all.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. It was a pretty good kiss, I think, in this most recent one. There was a sense of like in it. But yeah, what did you think?
I thought that the pacing of the way that Dakota Johnson, is that her name?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
The way that she delivered it really just took all of the
Yeah.
punch out of it. It was
agree.
so slow, and like the expressions on her face while she's reading it to the camera, just I was pretty upset because I was waiting for that moment, and it just felt sour.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. It was not what you want in this moment. Half agony, half hope. I mean, Bree, is there a better letter in literature? It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
Yeah. I mean, is Netflix like, are they tapping into Bridgerton's been a hit. People are loving.
Absolutely.
Is that what we're doing here?
Yeah.
I feel like
it was just written all over it. Yeah.
Well, and that's the problem is because Bridgerton works because it's basically a bodice ripper. It's got that kind of intensity. But Persuasion is the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
It's about this 27-year-old shy, woman that's finally by the end able to do what she wants and able to find love. And it's very sweet. It's not a bodice ripper by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah. I saw recently that they have a new Marilyn Monroe coming out that's I guess based off of a Joyce Carol Oates book called Blonde. And I'm like, you guys just put like an entire documentary out about her as well. I'm like, what is it with pop culture and like adapting these things that like are just in our face all the time? I'm like, do we need another like Marilyn Monroe film at this point? Like, let the lady rest in peace. So yeah, I was like, with this, it felt like, okay, they know Bridgerton's hot and it's going to be like December is when it comes out. Let's give them, another
something to hold them
romance.
over.
Yeah.
And I was disappointed because I was ready to defend this movie because like I said, I usually, because there's Austenites that are so picky about anything that strays from the book at all. Like in the 2007 Persuasion, when she gets the letter, she then runs to find Wentworth. And there are people she would never run. She would never run in Regency era England.
Yeah.
And I'm like, come on, you got to allow like a little bit of dramatic interpretation from the director
And the
like,
modern day director.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some that just want it to be so safe. And so I was ready to defend this one and be like, no, you're all wrong. It's really good. And I just couldn't. They just went too far. But yeah, I like how she says such a letter was not to soon be recovered from.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Line. Right.
Yeah.
And I kind of wondered why, in reading it this time, why does Mr. Elliot not go after Elizabeth, her sister and sister? Because it seems like that would be the easier sister to engage with, that because her sister is much more, cares way more about appearance and rank and titles and all of that. I don't know. Do you have any take on that, Aaron?
Yeah, I thought that was odd too. I guess I never placed that much in the book because it seems like that sister got, I don't know, just kind of sidelined or is very forgettable in the book. So it would make sense though, that they would be a better match. I did think it was a little odd with Mr. Elliot without Mrs. Smith. I'm not surprised that they wrote Mrs. Smith out of it. Like that's, kind of a side tangent in the book that would have distracted in the movie. But to have Mr. Elliot just out himself to Anne of like, oh yeah, I want to make sure I get my fortune, and yeah, duh.
I wonder if that's where like all the rom-coms got how, like in the rom-coms, there's always like a super obvious choice that this person should end up with, but they never do. I wonder if they got that from Jane Austen.
Yeah, maybe. Well, and I think with this new movie, they cast Henry Golding, and they were promoting that big time, but then they realized, oh shoot, we can't cast Henry Golding and make him the villain. We have to redeem his character somehow, because they literally wanted him to be the second person on the call sheet. So that's why I think they did what they did to change his character and give him this super happy ending with his triumphant wedding. And it's just
yeah.
But I think that's why they lost their nerve to make Henry Golding the villain. But yeah, I mean, I do also think it's interesting with Jane Austen that for the most part, almost all the married characters in her books are twits, are bad.
Yeah.
There's a few exceptions, like the Gardners in Pride and Prejudice or the Westons and Emma, but the exceptions, I mean, most people are like Charles and Mary, it's just this, you can tell they can't stand each other. And I love Mary. She's so funny. I mean, I love how she goes from being near death ill to being upset that she's not invited to the party like a few minutes later.
Yeah.
I can go, and she's so happy when Anne agrees to watch the kids, and I know, I just think that's really funny. You talk about being totally unself-aware is Mary.
Yeah, those were the best parts of the movie where she was in. Definitely.
Yeah, and she's usually my favorite in the 1992 version. She's played by Sophie Thompson, who is Emma Thompson's sister, and she's very funny. She's also in the Gwyneth Paltrow Emma, Miss Bates. She's funny there too. So yeah, I don't know, Bree, did you have any? I know we've been rattling on, but did you have any other sort of thoughts about the book as you're?
Let me check my notes. I think that's it. Like I said, I was a little nervous, but I think the part that really stole the show for me was just how relatable Anne felt. The plot is very kind of subtle. Like I remember Pride and Prejudice feeling like super dramatic, and this one really didn't feel that way.
So there's no like when she refuses Dorothy, that's like such like a big dramatic moment. There's no such moment in this story. It's all more kind of, like I said, that's why like taking out whatever stakes that they had in the movie was such a mistake, because there's really not that many to begin with.
Right. Yeah. The characters, I mean, are walking around most of the movie.
If you
just
know that
socializing.
if you know that they're in love with each other midway through, then it's just like them going to dinner a lot. Like there's no tension.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Jen Johans, host of the podcast Watch with Jen, which delivers a steady stream of great movie recommendations, thoughtful career deep dives, and first-rate conversations with film critics, authors, actors, journalists, filmmakers, and more. You can find Watch with Jen wherever you get your podcasts, or hear us first at our Patreon at patreon.com/filmintuition.
Let's talk about our reading roundup. So I had already read Pride and Prejudice in April, and I read Sensibility, and I decided, okay, well, I'm just going to read all of the Jane Austens this year, like I used to do. So that's the first one I have actually talked about is Sensibility. I listened to it on audiobook when I was going to Bear Lake. So I finished it there and back, and I still love it. It was my first Jane Austen. I really like the dynamic between the two sisters. You have Eleanor, who is is more careful in how she expresses her emotions and her feelings, but she still has those. And then you have the free-spirited Marianne. And of course, most people have seen the movie, but Kate Winslet is the movie. In that movie, Emma Thompson is way too old to be playing Eleanor. She's supposed to be 19, and she was 35, I think, when she was playing. And so people think that the character of Eleanor is like an old maid, like Anne, but that's not the case. She's just more, I don't know, even-keeled than Marianne. And I definitely can relate to both characters in a lot of ways, because I definitely have that independent side of me, but then I also am the oldest daughter in the family, and the one to kind of try to kind of listen to everybody and keep everybody happy. So I love it. I think it's great. And so that's my first one. What about you, Bree? What's your first book?
The first one that I read, or that I'm mentioning on the list, is The Dead Romantics by Ashley Poston, which is kind of all over the place at the moment. And I feel like it's a book that deserves the hype that it's getting. The main character is a ghostwriter. She's been writing for this woman in Maine who just, never supposedly leaves the house, according to what we get at the beginning of the book. And yeah, she was dating this guy. She sees dead people, guys. And she comes from her father. Her and her father have this gift of seeing dead people, and they ran a funeral home back home. And when she was a teenager, she helped a dead boy in her grade solve his murder. And so of course everybody thought she was full of crap and kind of ran her out of town. So yeah, she's been like ghost writing, and she writes sexy romance novels and that she doesn't tell anybody about. And this is her romance with a ghost. I don't want to spoil it, but you think he's a ghost for the majority of the book, and it's really good. There's something like really cozy about it. It's so hard to describe this book. It's really sweet. It's really cozy. I love the family dynamic. Her dad in the book has passed away, so they're planning his funeral, which sounds weird to say that it's cozy, but like seeing all the family together, like planning, their dad's funeral, who in the town was like the go-to guy for funerals. It was also like really fun. So I loved it, guys. It's the Dead Romantics.
Does she have to die at the end in order to be with him if he's a ghost?
I can't spoil it, Rachel.
I'm not going to say what I think it is.
You're probably right, because I read another romance novel, and I was before like years ago, and I was like, I wonder if she's going to do this same thing that this book did, and it did, and I was like, okay.
Oh, maybe it would be like just like Heaven, where she's the ghost, but she's actually not a ghost. She's in the coma?
Yeah, no,
Yeah, maybe.
I
Okay.
don't want to spoil it. I don't want to spoil it.
Okay. Interesting. All right, Aaron, what's your first one you want to talk about?
So first one I want to talk about is Claim to Save His Crown by Pippa Roscoe. It's the third and final book in the Royals of Spartia trilogy. And it was so good. It was really good. This couple was teased in the first two books. And so very happy to finally get to this one. So the first two books are the princesses. So we have a brother who's king, and then his two younger sisters who are princesses. In the first two books, they get their romances and everything. And, you're looking at their brother, and he seems kind of like a dick most of the time, but he'll have these moments, and so you're just like, I need to know what this guy's about, I need to get in his head. And yeah, it was a great story. So the chemistry between the main characters is incredible. It was so fun all the way through.
That sounds good. Well, my next book I'm talking about is The Beach Escape by Rachel Mcgee. And they sponsored, Hallmark Publishing sponsored the podcast with this book. I interviewed her. So obviously I have a somewhat conflict of interest, I guess, on it. Yeah, it's a cute story. It's about this veterinarian who, she's had this bad relationship, this fiance who dumps her, and so she needs a change of pace, and so she decides to become this traveling veterinarian who like goes around and fills in for when practices need somebody. And she ends up, through various contrivances, filling in at this turtle center that's just for rehabbing and helping turtles. And she meets this guy there who's like the head of the turtle place. And and they actually takes their times. There were, if I'm honest, there were some times that were a little dry in the book, but their chemistry was really good, and you get a lot of time with them kind of filling out their relationship and going out and seeing the turtles, and her she becomes friends with his sister who's getting married, so there's kind of the subplot of the sister and brother-in-law relationship, which is nice, and lots of turtles, and the ocean. I'm a big ocean nut, so I enjoyed that. So yeah, if you're looking for a beach read, I think it's a solid pick.
Yay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did you read that one
before
Bree?
the end of summer? No, I haven't started it yet.
Okay. Yeah.
But yeah, I'm like, oh God, it's the end of summer. I need to read all those summer books I haven't read yet.
And that's from Hallmark Publishing. So y'all should check it out.
Yeah. Well, my next one is an historical. So my next three are ones that we read for the podcast. So Compromised into a Scandalous Marriage by Lydia and Andreas. She had already published, indie published some books, but Aaron and I interviewed her for she's a debut author with Harlequin. And in their historical line in particular, we're just so excited because we're slowly seeing more diversity in the historicals. And in this one, so, oh gosh, it's a tough read. If you are a fan of historicals and you're a fan of suspense, I guess, it's super intense. So the
Scandalous
heroine
marriage. Ooh.
Yeah. The heroine's parents have passed away. This takes place in 1902, I believe, in the Dominican Republic. And so she lives with her brother. He runs the show. Historical things. Okay. I don't really read a lot of historicals. And so in the beginning, she meets the hero. They're at a store or something, and they're kind of hitting it off. And then her brother steps in. Her brother is such a jerk. He's so insufferable. Well, he basically is like, you embarrassed me by talking to this gentleman in the store, blah, blah, blah. And kicks her out of their home in the middle of the night, and it's raining, and the closest place for her to go is to the hero's home. Well, then the brother shows up the next day with the cops, look, this guy kidnapped my sister, and now I'm embarrassed because she slept here overnight. So that's where the kind of scandal kind of thing comes in. They take the hero to jail, and he's like shackled to the wall because I mean they come from money. It's like the is it the sugar plantations? I think it's like sugar plantations or something. But yeah, he's like, basically, if you want to get out of here, you have to marry my sister to like not make this situation that I caught you all in look so bad. And at first he's like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, I'm not getting married to your sister. Well, eventually, after being in jail and kind of abused, he agrees to it. And he's like, I loved that at first. Like, he is like, you had something to do with this. Like, I don't trust you either. Like, you had to have masterminded this with your brother, and she's totally innocent, but he doesn't know that. And so this is their relationship. They do get married before they unshackle him from the jail. They have to get married. And so it's like really fast paced in that way. And it's just slowly seeing their relationship build despite her greedy, selfish brother kind of looming in the background. So I thought it had me on the edge of my seat. It's not something I would typically read. It was too intense, but it was really good.
But also based off of a real world circumstance. Too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, really? Whoa. Oh
She
my
does
gosh.
something with like museums and like reading through archives and was like, oh, this sounds like, it'd be a good historical romance. So
Well, what do you have next, Erin?
So next one I had is Midnight Train from Georgia by Glenda Sanders. This was an old temptation from 1996. And I read this one for the Hot July episode, but it ended up not being all that hot. it was just very, very sweet and swoony. So it's our two characters are on, a train going from Georgia to I think Pennsylvania somewhere, but they have similar names and they ended up with the same ticket to the same sleeper car. And so they have an argument about it. One of them tries to leave for a while, but it's not going to work. And so they come back and it's like, all right, we're going to share this bed, and they work out the rules and everything. But, they end up cuddling and it's being really sweet and everything. And then it turns out that like he's her grandma's lawyer, and her grandmother's, passes while the book is, during the book. And so he then becomes her lawyer, and they keep seeing each other and running into each other. And it is so sweet. He's a widower, single dad. So there's just so much in here that's just so adorable.
Gotta love a hot widower.
I
Yeah.
know.
that was good. All right. Well, my next book is also a sponsor of the podcast this month. And I interviewed the author. It's The Last Way Home by Liz Johnson. And this is a inspirational romance. So it does have a faith element, but I would say it's fairly mild. I think it was pretty well done. It's about this guy named Eli, who's a professional hockey player. When he started out his career in the NHL, he kind of distanced himself from his family, from his hometown. And then he ends up disgraced through some gambling kind of thing that he ends up involved in. And so he ends up at home, and there's this woman there named Violet who is working with his mom. And Violet has kind of her own tragic backstory that she's dealing with. And they had very good chemistry as a couple. There's sort of a prodigal son dynamic to the story, because his brothers are a little bit resentful of him. They don't like him, just like in the biblical allegory. And then the mother is welcoming and is so happy to have her son back, just like in the story. So that's kind of there. I mean, I think if it was had good characters, and there's a lot of characters that she's managing in one story, and it's all set in Prince Edward Island, and so yeah, I think if that sounds like your kind of thing, I think you'd enjoy it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
All right, Bree, what's your next one?
my next one is Matched by Masala by Mona Shroff. We did an interview with her. She's always just the sweetest. This is siblings best friend best friend romance, which I love that trope. The heroine is a cancer survivor, and she had it when she was like 17. So she's her way of like, I survived this is like, skydiving and diving in the ocean and riding motor, just like living life to the fullest. And she's a pastry chef. The hero of the book is like an actual, just regular chef. And it's their romance. It was really sweet. It reminded me of like why I love this trope so much. I loved that it wasn't like, oh, it has to be a secret. Like the sibling is fully aware that the two are crazy about each other, but it's just kind of like waiting for them to figure it out on their own kind of thing. Tons of food references. Mona Shroff is there's lots of Indian food and spices and seasonings, and don't read it hungry. It's a really emotional book, but it's still just super fun at the same time. I don't know how she does it, but she always manages to just balance both really well. So I loved it.
Cool. Aaron, do you have another?
I can talk about, let's see, Waking Up Married by Reese Ryan. This is part of the Bourbon Brothers. This is number 5. And it's about two best friends, so platonic best friends that they, usually will take each other on dates to events and things like that. But on this corporate event in Vegas, one of their siblings, can't remember which one, gives them a care package that has some brownies in it. And they were really good. And so they ate all of them. And the next morning they wake up and they find that they're married. And not only that, they've shared it on social media as well. And they have no idea what happened. So
what was in those brownies?
Yeah, there was something in those brownies.
What's this called again?
Waking Up Married.
Oh, this
it's hilarious.
It's like a romantic.
It felt like The Hangover.
Yeah. And we're going to talk to Reese here soon, so I'm super excited about that.
I have to get that one. That one sounds fun. Well, my last pick was Mansfield Park by Jane Austen. Like I said, I decided to read all of them, so this was next up. And this is my least favorite. I used to really not like it, but then every time I read it as an adult, I like it more because I think Fanny is a really interesting character. I mean, the fact that given her background, the fact that she refuses Henry Crawford over and over again shows a strong willpower on her part. And I think what makes it hard for modern audiences to accept Mansell Park is the fact that she marries her first cousin in the end, and also basically marries her brother. Like she was raised with Edmund her whole life, so it's not even like a cousin that she didn't know or something. No. It's like basically her brother. It's weird. But
and the guy that always looked out for her too.
It's a different time. And it really doesn't matter that much because literally they get together in the last like 2 pages of the book. And so most of it is about her being this interesting character that's willing to go against the wills of her uncle who's raised her, willing to go against pretty much everybody in society, but she does it in such a like respectful way that everybody likes her, which is just really interesting. And also this whole dynamic of basically you have these young adults who are bored trying to figure out what to do. So then they put on this sort of salacious play and it leads to all kinds of mischief. And it was really fun because I have this other little podcast I do with my friend called the Criterion Project. And we covered Metropolitan, which is a movie by Whit Stillman that is an homage to Mansfield Park. And it's really, the plot is really nothing like Mansfield Park, but in the sense of you have these sort of elites in the 80s, these elite haute bourgeoisie, they call them urban haute bourgeoisie, that are bored, that are hanging around, that are spouting philosophy like they know what they're talking about. And it's a very entertaining movie. I recommend the episode where we talked about it on the Criterion Project. But it was interesting to watch that movie and read the book at the same time and kind of think about how no matter what era you are, there are young adults that are bored, spouting ridiculous philosophy, and and Fanny is really an excellent character. So it's a book that has definitely grown on me over the years.
I
Aw.
I love in Mansfield Park and Emma, there's
Mm.
this big like build towards something that the characters are working for, and in both books, like it's just cut off at the knees. Like, when it gets to a certain point, someone steps in, it's like, no, that's not happening.
Yeah, her uncle comes home and he's just like, "You're doing what with my office?" You turned it into a theater. Oh my gosh. And I think it's more about the salaciousness, particularly of the play chosen.
Mhm.
And there was something I think scandalous about theater at that time that's maybe not now, but I think in any time like young adults doing a, lack of a better word, kind of a smutty play is probably not going to be looked on great by their parents.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, and yeah, Edmund's an interesting character too, because he's just pining after this woman the whole book, and she's just Fanny's sitting there like, what are you doing? Why do you like this person? She's terrible. And there are two versions, Mansfield Park. There's one from 1999 that I actually think is kind of underrated. It's pretty, there are some modern touches, but not that much. I don't know. I like it. So I think it's a hard book to translate to the screen, but
Yeah.
I think it's good. I like it. I think. And then there's another version from 2007 with Billy Porter in it, and it's fine. It's not great, but
It's fine.
it's serviceable, I guess. So there we go. We did it. Oh wait, no, you have one more. Sorry, Bree. What's your last one?
My last one is Shielding Her Son by Katie Richards, and it's a Harlequin intrigue. So I don't want to spoil it because it's so easy to spoil suspense novels.
Mhm.
But basically, there's a woman, a single mother. Her she found out she was pregnant shortly after a car crash, which killed her husband, who was like super, I don't know, mentally kind of abusive. And you know why, because his father's like super controlling and the same type of person. So once he passes away, she goes off and kind of goes in hiding. And it looks like the father has potentially tracked down where she is, because her son is his heir. And she's just like, no, I don't want my kid like in that life. Like, you're not going to control him like you've done your sons. But it seems like the person is a lot closer to her than she realizes. Like, the danger is a lot closer to home than when we realize. So it's really fast paced. She does romantic suspense so well that the suspense is a lot more heavier than the romance, but it is so fast paced and good. Like, she just really weaves these kinds of stories together so flawlessly. So again, that's Shielding Her Son by Katie Richards.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, we did it. Yay.
Yay. We did it. Thank you for having us.
Yes,
This was
thank you.
so much fun. Thank you so much, Erin, for coming on. You were a great guest.
Oh, of course.
I really appreciate it. And so if people want to follow you on social media, all the fun stuff, how can they do that?
Okay, so I am the channel Erin's Reading Room. I'm also Erin's Reading Room on Instagram, and on Twitter, I'm Erin's R Room. And then I have like 3 TikToks out there, but Erin's Reading Room is there.
Okay, great. And Bree, how can people find you?
I am on Instagram at Bree.unabashedly. I mean, I have a presence there. I haven't been very present there, but I'm there. And I co-host the Categorically Romance podcast with Erin, and we post at least every Saturday, sometimes Wednesdays and Saturdays. So
Nice.
just keep up with us.
Yeah, y'all should definitely check it out. And you can find all that in the description. You can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all of our social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'll put a link down to the episode that I did with Esther Hatch, where we ranked all the versions of Persuasion. It's pretty fun. And I'll also put a link down to my review of the most recent Persuasion from my site. So take a look at that. Also, make sure you're following us on Goodreads. Erin, I assume you're on Goodreads? No?
I do. It's an old account. You can find me on
okay.
Storygraph, though. Yeah.
Well, we'll put whatever links we have in the description, so check that out. And make sure you're following the podcast, Hallmarkies Pod and Hallmarkies Podcast, all of our social media. And if you are listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews to both of our podcasts. We'd sure appreciate it. 5 stars. And if you are listening on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have our Patreon group and merch store. Take a look at that. and let us know what you think of Persuasion, the new version, the book, everything, all the other books that we talked about, what you've been reading. We'd love to hear in the comment section or on Twitter. And thanks again, everybody. We'll talk to you all next month. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.